Hi everyone. In this two-part tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build Apple's website using Clutch. We're going to walk through each section of the site step by step, and I'm going to show you how Clutch makes it easy to build the different sections of Apple's website, including the Nav Bar, the hero sections, and also the promotional grid section over here, our carousels, and finally the footer section. This is going to be a great project if you're new to Clutch. I want to see how to structure a full responsive landing page using Clutch elements. Alright then, let's get into it. So, the first thing you're going to want to do is open the starter template link in the video description and clone it. This starter template contains all the assets we'll be using throughout the project, like the logos, the videos, the icons, and every other asset we're going to use. So let's get started with that. So I already have the link here in my browser. So I'm just going to hit enter. Now this is going to launch the Clutch app. And we're going to have two fields here, new project name and workspace. So let's add in project name. You can name this anything you want, like Apple website clone. I'm going to name this Apple starter template. And then you can also choose the workspace you want this project to reside in. So I'm going to leave this here in my first workspace. Okay, next let's save the copy. Now it's going to load the project. Nice. And now you can see the project itself is blank. So there's nothing on the canvas. There's nothing going on here. But if you go over to the application bar and click the media button, you can see over here we have all our assets. So our gallery, our hero photos, our logos, our promotional photos, our stock photos, our TV Plus gallery, and the hero video that we see when the user first loads the page. So that's what this template basically provides us with. And now we can actually start working on the project. All right, so let's kick things off by adding a background for our layout. To do that, I'm going to go over here to the site layout, and then I'm going to add a background. We're going to use a dark background for our website. So we have 161617, and there we go. And now we have a dark background applied. Now this value is going to be used multiple times in our website. So we're going to convert this value to a token so we can easily reuse it in multiple places in our application. To access the token menu, you hover over the field and then you click the green icon. And now we have a list of tokens. Here we have the black, we have white, we have amber 50, amber 100. So all these tokens comes pre-built in Clutch. They make use of Tailwind semantic tokens. And what they basically help us do is define CSS values that we can use to make our website theme more consistent and easier to manage. So instead of giving each element static color values or spacing values, we can just have a consistent value or variable that we can use throughout our application. So to add this as a token, we click this add button over here, and then we name this dark background and save the token. And with that, we have a dark background color token. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is add in our nav bar. So I'm going to go over to the library, head over to sections, and here we have three nav bar variants. So we have a basic nav bar, a link-centered nav bar, and a link-left nav bar. So the nav bar we're going to use will depend on what we need. And if you head over to the website over here, you can see that we're using a centered nav bar where the links are in the center. That's what we want. We also want our nav bar to have a sort of glassy dark background with, of course, with the logo, with the Apple logo and a search and bag icon, and then with these 10 links. All right, so let's try and make our website nav bar look more like that. And to start with, we'll add in our link-centered nav bar. All right. Now that that's added in, let's start styling it to get it to look more like this. All right. So we're going to start by styling the main nav bar. Then we'll move on to the row and then its children, like with the logo, desktop menu, the CTAs, and the mobile menu, which you can access in the mobile screen. So, all right, let's start with the nav bar. We head over to the properties panel here, and we can see two classes being applied, or two sets of styles being applied. One is as a class called wrapper, and you can see here it's adding some styles. We don't want any of these styles, so we're just going to delete that. And over here we have another set of styles called the instance styles, and these are applied directly to the HTML element. So we're going to change the height value and then add other modifications directly. So over here we want to change our height value. Now when we click this field, we can see that it has a height of spacing 16 being applied to it, but we want a smaller height for our nav bar. So we're going to go over here and click the spacing 11 value instead. And with that, we have a nav bar that looks a bit smaller. All right, now we're going to go over to our background. We're going to click this color icon here and give our background a dark transparent background. So we enter 1616, 1616, 161617, and then give this an alpha value of 80%. And we're going to add this as a token as well. So click on the green icon here, click the add, and we'll name this nav background. Save it. And another thing to note is that you can edit these values anytime you want over here in the tokens menu. So you click the tokens button, we access the token menu, and from here we can edit any of these values anytime we want and change them. And so if we apply these values to multiple elements in our page, we can edit every single one of them, or by just editing this token value here, and then it applies to the other elements that use these token values. So all right, now that we've done that, let's give our nav bar the glassy appearance, and let's also make it fixed. So when the user scrolls down the website, it remains fixed at the top over here. So to do that, we'll start with the layout. First off, we're going to add a justify to the center. Then we're going to make its position fixed. So click here and we make it fixed. Next, we're going to set the top value to 0, the right to 0 as well, and the bottom to 0. All right, now that that's done, let's give our nav bar a width of 100%. All right, so now it's looking more like what we had before. Let's give it that glossy effect I mentioned earlier. We're going to head over to the effects section, click on add effect, and we're going to add two effects. We're going to add a saturate value. So click on saturate, and then we give it a value of 180%. We're also going to add another effect, which is going to be a blur effect, and then give it a value of 20 pixels. All right, so I know right now it isn't really looking like much, but once we start working on the nav bar's children, like the row and the logos, everything will start to come together more. So let's start with the row. We head over to the classes field, and we can see we have a container class being applied here. We don't need this class, so we're going to click the classes field and delete the container class. All right, now that's done, let's go over to the justify content and set the value to stretch. So we're also going to give it a gap of 20 pixels. So to do that, we'll head over to our tokens and give it a spacing 5 value. Nice. And lastly, we're going to add a margin of auto and a width of auto. Okay, so with that setup, we can now start styling the individual elements within our row. Let's start with the logo. We click the logo. Now we don't want this default clutch logo, so we're going to change this to Apple logo. To do that, we click on the SVG within the logo, we go over to the properties panel and set the source to our logo value. So we click the field and then this pops up. Under our logos folders, we select the Apple logo. And with that, we have our Apple logo. It still has a black color. So we're going to change the color to be a white. So since it's an SVG, we need to use the fill property. So we add a custom property here. We call it fill. And we give it a value of white. So we add the white token over here. And now we have a white logo that looks more like what we have over here. All right, now let's adjust the size. We are going to give it a height of 20 pixels. So we go over here to the height and we change this from spacing 8 to spacing 5. We can also do the same thing for our width. So from spacing 8 to spacing 5. And now we have a smaller SVG, which is what we have in our final finished website. All right, now we're going to move on to the navigation links. We're going to head over to desktop menu. We're going to give all these links similar font size. So to do that, we can just style the desktop menu. So I'm going to head over to the desktop menu. We want our links to have a very small font size. So we'll click the desktop menu, head over to the properties panel. We go over to our typography section, and then we set the size to text extra small, right? And we can do the same thing with the line height. So we have text extra small line height, which we can find over here, right? Once we've added that in, we also need to change the color, but with a bit of transparency. So to do that, we'll head over to our colors field here, click the color icon, set it to white, and then we set the alpha value to 80%. And just like with the other colors we've defined previously, we can add this as a token and set it to nav link color. Then we save the token, and now we have a nav link color. So right now, when we hover over the link element, we don't have any response, any interactive response going on right now. So to fix that, we're going to add a hover value to our links. So the links turn white when the user hovers over them. All right, so to do that, we're going to head over here to the links and delete the links we have here. We're also going to delete this drop down menu over here. All right, and now we're going to convert the instance styles we have for this particular link to a class. And to do that, we just right click the instance style icon and then convert to class. And now we have it converted to a class called link. All right, so next let's click the link, and we want to add in a color for the hover state. So let's go over to the state field, click, and then we should see a global hover state over here. We click the hover state. And now, while it's in this hover state, any styles we apply will be applied whenever the element is being hovered. All right, so now let's head over to the text color and we'll set this to white. So now what happens now is whenever you hover over an element, it turns white. Nice. Okay, so just to make this a little bit more fluid, we can add a little animation effect. And to do that, all we just need to add is a transition property. And when you do that, automatically it's already set to have a transition of 0.3 seconds with no delay, and this applies to all properties. So what this does is when it changes from the idle state to hover state, we get a nice smooth transition with the text color. So now let's check that out. As you can see, we have a nice transition from a transparent whitish color to a full white color. All right, so now we can duplicate this and basically set this up to the links we have in our final website. So we can start with this. We can either edit it through here by going over to the text property and then setting this to store. And then we get our store here. Another way to do this is to double click the value here and then set it from here. So I'm going to be using this method and I'm going to set these all to the link names we have here. All right, so with our navigation links done, let's move on to navigation buttons. To do that, we can click on our CTAs here and we can rename this to nav buttons. Right. Okay, so now we want two icon buttons as our navigation buttons. So to do that, we're going to delete the outline button over here and then replace the default text here with an icon. So let's start by deleting the outline button. Select it and then hit delete. And then select the text within the regular button and also delete that. All right, next we're going to add in an icon. So if you go over to the completed website, you have a search icon and a bag icon. So let's add that over here. So first, let's add our search icon. And next, let's duplicate this. And you can duplicate easily by hitting Command D. Let's replace the search icon with a bag icon. And there we go. And now it's looking much more like what we have on our completed site. The only thing here would be the gap. It's a little bit too much. So let's remove the gap here from the nav buttons. So select nav buttons and then remove the gap. And there we go. Now we have the desktop version of our nav bar looking really nice and similar to what we have going on here. Right, so now let's work on the mobile version next. So first things first, we're going to work on the drop-down menu trigger for the mobile version. So let's open this on the mobile screen. First off, we have something going on here. I think we need to disable this on mobile version. So let's go over here, select this state. So this is the state for the mobile landscape. This state applies different CSS classes based on a particular breakpoint. So here we're in the mobile landscape breakpoint. So let's select this state and see. So it already has a display of none. So I don't know why this is here, but let's just remove this and then add it back. Okay. And so it should be working well now. Next, let's also work on the row. First, select the mobile landscape and then give it a width of 100%. So over here, we can give it a width of 100% and also give it a justify content value of space between. And there we go. And now it looks much more like what we want. We also need to add a padding over here. So let's go to the nav bar and add a padding on the left side. So added a padding on the left side of 16 pixels, which will be spacing 4. There we go. Now we have our nav bar looking much more cleaner. And now we can move on with the drop-down menu. So let's go over to the drop-down menu trigger. The first thing we want to implement here is to have a menu icon only when the drop-down is closed. And while the drop-down is open, we want to have a close icon or an X icon. And to do that, we can make use of a logic primitive. So over here in the library, components, logic. So this logic primitive just basically gives us a way to render composition based on some setting condition. So we want to use the if primitive to render a menu when the drop-down menu state is closed and render the close icon when the drop-down menu is open. So to do that, let's start with menu. So we want to render it when the drop-down is closed. So to do that, we're going to go over here to the properties panel and then click this green icon over here. And now we're going to get a menu which shows us a list of variables. So the variable we're looking for is this, the open variable. The issue now is we want the menu to be displayed when the drop-down menu open state is false, not when it's true. So if we just add this here, you can already see it evaluates to true. So this is going to be displayed when it is true, which is what we don't want. We want it to be displayed when it's not true. So to do that, we're going to come over here and add a utility function. So click the function button here. We're going to use the isFaulty utility function. So this function is basically going to check if a value is false, and then if it is, then it returns true. Otherwise, it returns false. So let's select it. And in the value field, we're going to also click the green icon and then select the drop-down open state. So what this means is when the drop-down is closed, we're going to have our menu. But then when the drop-down is open, there's no menu. Right. So now let's add another one for our close button. Add another if, and then we set the condition to open. And then under here, we add in a close icon, or you can also call it an X icon. Right. So when we add that in, we should now have a dynamic button that displays different icons based on the state of the drop-down menu. So when it's open, X, and when it's closed, we have the menu icon. Nice. All right, so next we're going to work on the mobile menu content. So currently what we have here is a white background with small links, but if you look at the finished product, we have something very different going on here. So we're going to work on this so we can match what we have in the finished product. All right, let's get started. First off, we're going to change the background of the mobile menu content. So select the drop-down menu content and head over to background. And we're going to give this a dark background. So select colors, dark background. There we go. Next, we're going to change the text color to a white color. There we go. All right. Next thing we're going to do is work on the side offset. So currently, if you look really closely, you can see the drop-down menu is spaced away from the menu trigger itself by about 4 pixels. So we need this to change. We need to reduce it to 0 so that they can be joined together when you look at them visually. So to do this, we're going to change the side offset props of the drop-down menu content, which you can find over here in the properties panel. So here it has a side offset. It says it's the distance in pixels from the trigger. So we want to reduce this from 4 to 0. So there's no visible distance at all. So the next thing we're going to work on is the drop-down menu link items. So we only need one, and then we can duplicate that one we work on and move on with the rest. So let's delete these initial items. So you hit Shift, select, and then delete them. So we have only one link now. What we're going to do with this link is increase the size, and we're also going to add a hover state. So when the user hovers over the link, we don't have this white background. We're going to tone this down to make it a bit more transparent. Let's get started. So first things first, let's increase the font size. So we'll go over to typography and we increase the font size to 1.75 rem. We'll also increase the font weight to 600. And then we add a bit more padding on the left side. So we go over to layout and size, and then we add a padding on the left. We'll give this a padding of 48 pixels. And then if we search for the token for that, we have spacing 12, which is 48 pixels. So we add that in. And now we have our link looking more like what we have in the finished product. But there's still work to be done. We still need to work on the menu link item when it's being hovered over. So that's the last thing we need to do. So to do this, we're going to make use of the state that each drop-down menu item has, which is called the highlighted state. So to do that, we'll just select the drop-down menu link item, and over here, we can find a highlighted state. So we'll select that. And now that it's selected, we will add a dark background, a more transparent background. So let's go over to background and give this a more transparent background. So we'll give it a background of white, but then a transparent white. So give it an alpha value of 5%, move this up here, and there we go. So let's test what we've done. So now if you hover over the menu link item, we have something more like this. Okay. So lastly, before we wrap up, let's just export this instance style into a class. We can just leave it as drop down menu link item. So that way, when we want to change anything in the future, all we just need to do is just change all the styles in these classes alone. All right, let's duplicate these. I think we should have about 10. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that's the amount we have here as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right. So we have 11. So let's duplicate this. And then let's name all this to reflect what we have going on here. So, Mark, watch, vision, entertainment, accessories, and support. Okay. So I think we're done here. All right. So now that's done, we're going to change a few more things before we can complete this section. So the first thing we're going to change is the buttons. So if we go over here to view this on all screens and okay, while this is being viewed on all screens, if we change the background to a white background, so we just want to check something for now. Right, you can see these have a dark, buttons have a dark background. So we need to change this to transparent. And we also need to work on the Z index on the nav bar. So when it scrolls over other elements, it doesn't get behind them. Right, so let's do that. So first things first, let's change this back to a dark background. Let's go over to our home page. Let's go to our buttons. We're going to give them a transparent background. So we'll just go over here and write transparent. We can do the same thing for the second button. So transparent. And now if we go back here and change the background to white again, we can see it's now transparent. Cool. So last thing will be our nav bar. We're going to give this a Z index of 999. Yeah. And with that, I think we are done. We can test this on different screens, see how it works. And this works just fine. And that's it. All right, so now we're done with our nav bar. The next thing we're going to work on is hero section. So here, over here, if you refresh, you can see we have a hero section that displays a video when the user loads the page. And we also have other hero sections over here. And finally, we have a grid. So these are all CTAs, including the hero sections themselves. They are all CTAs. So we're going to implement this using the CTA sections. So let's go over back to our page. If we head over to our library, go over to sections, you can see here that Clutch has some CTA sections. And if you look really closely, you can see the centered CTA over here matches what we're trying to go for here. So we're going to use this for our hero section and the other CTAs. All right, so let's add that in. Okay, so now you might have noticed there are already a few problems. The first thing here is this CTA goes all the way up. So we need to give it a margin so it's spaced away from the nav bar. And if you look closely over here as well, you can also see that the height of this section takes up the entire viewport besides the nav bar height here. So we're just going to implement this here. Also, another thing to notice is that everything here has a white background and has a bit of spacing. So to implement this, we're going to use a column. And then to implement this here, we're going to use a grid. So all right, let's get that done. So first, let's wrap this in a column. So now we're going to add some styles to our column. First thing we're going to add is a gap. So we're going to give it a gap of 12 pixels. So that's spacing 3. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is add a margin top. So we're going to go over here to margin. We're going to click this, the third icon over here, and then give this a margin of 44 pixels, which is the height of the nav bar. So that will be spacing 11. So if we do that, we can see now that the CTAs or the hero section is separated from the nav bar. Nice. All right, so one last thing we're going to do to the column is give it a white background. So let's go over here to background and we're going to give this a white background. Okay. Now let's move on to our actual CTA. So first things first, we're going to name this iPhone 16 Pro. So the reason for naming it this way is so when we're going back to these sections and editing them, we can easily find them. And the first thing we're going to do for this section is increase the height. So I'm going to go over here to its instance, the properties panel, and we're going to give this a height of 100 small viewport minus 44 pixels. So to do that, we'll come over here, click the green icon, go over to our code, and this lets us enter custom CSS code values. For example, we have a calc function here that calculates the full width minus a particular variable. Let's do that for our section. So we'll give this a height of 100 SVH minus 44 pixels. And with that, you can already see it has taken the full height of the viewport minus the nav bar height. Okay, that's great. Now let's move on to our section. So we're going to go over here to our section class. This section class is going to be applied to all the CTA sections we add. Once we're done with the iPhone 16 Pro and we move on to the other sections here, they're all going to share this same section class. So we want to add some general stylings that's going to be applied to every single one of them. The section class is going to have a relative position. It's also going to have a padding of 47 pixels. And this is 47 pixels all around, right? So it's going to have a padding of 47 pixels, and then it's going to have a height of 580 pixels. Right. So you can see here, this text is being slashed. The reason why this is happening is because the instance style that we have over here, which is what we've already set as 100 viewport height minus 44 pixels, is overriding the class styles that we have here. So in general, that's what happens when you style instances, they override any other styles. So with that done, we're going to move on to the row component over here. And if you know what, let's just open up every other section because we're going to work on every single one top down. Okay, so for the row, we're going to give it a position of relative as well. So let's give this a relative position. And something we're going to do real quick, we're going to change this back, but just so we can follow along more easily and see what's going on, we're going to give this a black background. Right, so now we can easily see what's going on here a bit better. Yeah, so let's move on to the row. We've given it a position of relative. Next thing we're going to do is give it a z-index of 2, just so it stays above on top. Nice. Next, I'm going to head over to the content wrapper. We're going to give this a gap of spacing 5. So I'm going to change this from spacing 20 to spacing 5. It should be 20 pixels. So the distance between them is not so much and it's closer to what we have here. The next thing we're going to do is work on the subheading. But before we do that, let's just change this text to iPhone 16 Pro. So we can already see it's looking similar to what we have going on here. Right. So once we're done with that, let's work on the subheading. We're going to give this a margin top of spacing 1.5, which is 6 pixels. We're also going to give it a font size of 1.75 rem and a line height of 1.143. And with that, let's change the text over here just so it looks better. I'm going to change this to what we have here. There we go. Now let's clear this value. Okay, so this doesn't actually apply to this subheading, but I think we'll need to add this for other subheadings. Okay, let's remove this line height for now. And yeah, we have it looking just like how it looks over here. Okay, so next thing we're going to work on is our CTA buttons. We're going to first have a primary button and then a primary outline button. And eventually we'll also do the same thing for here, having a secondary and a secondary outline button. Let's start with our primary button. We'll go over here and we're going to change the padding. So the horizontal padding is going to have a value of 12 pixels. We're going to give this a spacing 3 value. Then it's going to have a vertical padding of 20 pixels. So let's just give it 20 pixels over here, which is spacing 5. So the next thing we're going to do is give this a font size of 16 pixels. So we'll go over to typography and we give this a text-based token value. And then once we're done, we also give it a background color of blue 500. So select that. We also give it a radius. So we're going to give this a radius of 999 pixels. So it's fully rounded. And then we're also going to give it a border of 1 pixels and same color, which is our blue 500. Okay. And that's about that for our button. So now we're going to name this what we have here, learn more. And just something I'm noticing right now is the padding isn't really being applied. So I don't know why. Let me try entering this again. So let's give this a value of 21 pixels. And then let's give this a value of 12 pixels. Okay. Or maybe it should be, or you know what, let's just check it directly. Sometimes this can happen. You might need to check the values itself to see that everything matches. Okay. Okay, so we're going to give this 12. And then we'll give this 21. So now it looks more like what we have going on here. Let's duplicate. Right, so now the instance styles are still being applied. We duplicate that. Then we extract this into a primary button. And then we go over here and we extract this into a primary button outlined. So the difference between these two now is this one is going to have an outline, which we'll add now. So for the outline button, we're going to give it a transparent background. So we just come over here, we click here to remove the token value. Then we can give this a value of parent. You can also give the text color a value of blue 500. There we go. And that's about it. Every other thing remains the same. Then we'll change this text value from learn more to buy. Right. And now we have a CTA section looking a bit closer to what we have in our final product. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is add in our video player. So first, let's just remove this background so we don't forget about that. Let's clear the value. Right, now let's add in our background. So the video player we're going to use the video player from our library. So if you go over to library, you go to video. We have two main components for our video player. We have the fully featured video player and our simple video player. We're going to add in our simple video player. All right, and when you add that in, you have it looking weird. So to do this, we're going to make this absolutely positioned relative to the CTA section. Okay, so let's do that. So we select the simple video player. We go over here to position. We make this absolute. All right. Next, we go over here to the top, give it a value of 0. Give our right a value of 0. And we can also give the bottom value of 0. Nice. The next thing we want to do is give this a width and a height of 100%. So I'm going to do that. And same thing over here. So now it's fully contained. Okay, now we're going to adjust some of its properties. So first things first, we need to add the video that we're going to use, which is the promotional video for the iPhone 16 Pro. So we already have that in our assets. So we're just going to click this and go over to our videos. And here we have the iPhone 16 Pro video. We open. and then we should have that video playing. We can play it here, and let's play this, and then yeah, we can see this play. So now we still have a lot of work to do. We need to make this such that it plays automatically when the user reloads the page, and we need to make it such that it's not confined within these borders and it doesn't have any of these controls. So to do this, we're going to go over here to the videos control root. I'm going to delete this because we don't need any of this. So let's delete this. Right. The next thing we're going to do is delete the buffering indicator. We don't need this either. Nice. Now we're going to go over here to our simple video player and add some properties so as to make this look really nice and work properly as well. So first we're going to add an autoplay property. So we want this to play automatically when the page loads at first. So we'll set the autoplay to true. Next we're going to add an aspect ratio property. We're going to set this to be 4:3, so 4/3. Nice. Next thing we're going to do is add the muted property. So we'll set this to true as well. And lastly, we're going to add the paused value. So we're going to set the paused value to be false. So we don't want this paused when it first loads. The video that loads properly. So the video doesn't quite contain the entire screen on this page width, but for most page widths that you encounter, most viewports, this is going to be able to contain everything, just like what we have going on here. You can see it contains the entire screen. So you don't have to worry about this for now. Just know that this is not how it's going to look like for most websites or for most devices. Okay, let's move on by adding a placeholder image. We're going to go over here and click the simple video player, and then we're going to add an image. So come over here and then search image. Then we have an image primitive. We add that in. And there we have something like this going on. All right. So this image is going to be a placeholder image. So if the video takes a while to load or it doesn't load at all for whatever reason, we just have this placeholder image sitting here as a kind of buffering or just as a backup in case the video doesn't load. So we add in our image. Now let's position it. So we give this an absolute position. We give it a z-index of 1. And then we give it a top value of 0. Right, 0. And then bottom 0. And also the left as well. Let's give this 0. Right. Next thing we want to do now is adjust the width and height. So we're going to give this a full width and height. So 100% here and 100% here as well. So actually the z-index should be -1. We don't want this being displayed over the video. We want this to be behind it. So we're going to give this a z-index of -1. Nice. And then with that, let's give this an alt. We're just going to call this iPhone 16 Pro. We can just give it this value and then add in our image. So here, where we'll find our image is under Hero Photos, I believe. And then we have a start frame. So we're going to select the start frame image and then open. And now we should have it being displayed. But just to confirm it's really being displayed right now, we're going to disable this video player for a while. Just going to set this to something smaller like this. We can see our image isn't being displayed, so I don't know why this is happening. I'm going to try and see if it has anything to do with the z-index. Okay, so it's the z-index. Okay, so when we set it to 0, it can actually be displayed. All right, let's set things back to the way they were and see how this looks like. Maybe we need to increase this z-index to 1. And then let's refresh this. Okay, it's still over. We put this on -1. And let's refresh this. And now it works properly. So we set the image to -1 and then we set our video player to 1. And then it should be ordered correctly. Okay, Now that we're done with this, let's move on to the next section. The next section we're going to work on is the iPhone 16 and the MacBook Air sections. So let's get started with those. The first thing we're going to do is just duplicate this. And yeah, I know we have this going on right now, but we're just going to remove this value. So remove this height value. And now we have something more similar to what we need here. Next, we're going to delete the video player. So select the video player and hit delete. Nice. So with that deleted, let's go over here and give this a background image. So first, let's rename it. So it's not the iPhone 16 Pro, it's the iPhone 16. Next, let's give this a background. So we're going to go over here to background, click the add button over here. And we're going to select the image icon and then select our image. So we're going to use the iPhone 16 image. Right, and now we have something looking like this. And then we're going to set the X value over here to 50%. Right, and now we have iPhone 16 CTA section. We're going to rename this to iPhone 16. Just like the previous one, it also has the text of Beautiful Apple Intelligence, but we have a different button. We have a white button. So we need to change these buttons to be a white button. All right, so to do that, we're going to use a little trick here. So with the primary button selected, let's head over to the properties panel and then select the primary button class. Then we're going to right click and hit copy. And there you can see here copied theme style is copied to clipboard. Now we're going to paste this style to instance styles. So hit paste. And now we can delete this primary button. And now we have all the styles from the primary button pasted in the instance of this particular button. So now what we're going to do is just change a few things. We're going to change the text color. So we're going to change this from white to black. Then we're going to change the background to have a white background. So select color white. And also the border, set it to white. And every other thing we leave it the same. And now we have a secondary button. We're just going to call this a secondary button. And now all we just need to do is select this and convert it to a class. And we'll call this secondary button. Nice. Now we're going to delete this one over here. Or what other thing we could do is do the same thing we did for the secondary button. So we come over here, copy, click instance styles and paste this over here. And now we can delete this primary button, or the primary button outline class. Now we can go over to the border and we change this to white. Then we can also change the text color to white. And there we go. We have it looking exactly like what we have over here. And now this, we'll convert it. We'll go over to the properties panel, the classes instance. We'll convert this to a class and we can call this secondary button outline. There we go. Okay, now that we have our iPhone 16 section wrapped up, let's move on to the next section, which is going to be our MacBook Air. So the only difference between these two is obviously with the text color and then the buttons, and also we have a text over here which says Beautiful Apple Intelligence. So we're just going to duplicate this over here, change the text color, and then work on this text over here. Okay, so let's do that. First off, let's duplicate this section. Then all we need to do over here for the buttons is we can change the text, just change it one after the other and change this to MacBook Air. Then we can change the subheading to this. And then we can change this over here. This is important. And let's change the line height. So here we're going to apply a line height of 1.143. I don't know if it's supposed to look this way. Let's see. Okay, so let's change the height here to something 30. Oh, okay, I've figured out the issue. Okay, so I get the issue now. This is being set to pixels. So we need this to not be a pixel value and just be this, right? So once we set it correctly, it's going to display the way it should. Okay, now let's change the text color. We're going to have all the text over here be black. So under the text wrapper, we just go over to color and we set this to be a black color. And then we change the buttons as well. So we want a button similar to what we have going on here. So let's just copy this. So we can select it, copy the CTA wrapper, go over here, delete the CTA wrapper that we have with our MacBook Air section, and then select this, the content wrapper, and then paste it in. And with that, we have something more like what we want. Okay, next, let's change the name of this. Let's change it to MacBook Air as well. Okay, let's also change the background so we have an accurate background. So we select the background image here. We select an image. We go over to Hero Photos and we select the MacBook Air. Let's cancel this first and try again. Select image. Right, select the MacBook Air. There we go. Now we have something looking more like this, but we still need to add this text over here. So to do that, we're going to wrap this row in a column. So the column is going to contain this at the top and then this text at the bottom. So let's quickly do that. Let's go over here and wrap in the column. And for the column, all we need is a full height. So it takes the entire height that's being given. We also need it to be a flex column, but that's already there. Let's add a justify content of space between. Right. Next, let's add in our text. So all we need to do to add a text, you can go over here to the quick add strip and just add in a text. You can also hit T to add in a text. So whichever way. So if we hit T, it gets added, and delete this. We can also come over here and we can come over here, select this, and then add in a text, and that works fine too. So for our text, we want it to have a background or a color that is basically the background that we set. So we can do that using a CSS feature called background clip. So let's just get in and start doing that. So first off, we set the font weight to 500. So we'll go over here to typography, set this to 500. Let's set the color to transparent. Let's also change the name. So go over here to the text, change the name to built for Apple Intelligence, for Apple Intelligence. And then let's also align it to the center. So it sits nicely at the center. I know right now we can't see it, but we're going to get to that in a moment. The next thing we need to do is add the background. So we add in our background image. So there are two ways we can go about this. We could like manually go in here and try and add the colors one after the other, like as a linear gradient. So we'll come over here, click the linear gradient and manually add our colors. But just to make this easier, we're going to copy the code directly from the finished website and then paste it as a code value. So we'll come over here, select the green icon, and then paste our linear gradient over here. So let's go over to the website, inspect this, and then copy the linear gradient over here. And with that copied, let's just go over here and paste our CSS code. And with that, we now have our gradient background. So now we need to do one more thing to make this work, and that's the background clip feature that I mentioned earlier. So let's go over here and add in a background clip. So you can see it over here. And we're going to set the property to text. Okay, we can't see any text value here, so we can just enter it manually. I think that might be an issue, but we can set this to text and it should work. Okay, it doesn't. So there's another way we could do this. We could add in a tailwind utility class. because Clutch comes pre-built with Tailwind utility classes as well as tokens. So we could make use of one of their utility classes, say background or BG clip text, right? And then add Tailwind class, and with that, yeah, that should work fine as well. And so now we have our text sitting really nicely here, and it looks the way we want it to look. Let's also increase the font size to 21 pixels because right now it has a smaller font size. So let's change this to 21 pixels. Nice. And now we have a nice looking CTA section for the MacBook Air. Okay. So the next section we're going to move on to is this grid section that we have over here. This also has a bunch of CTAs for the other Apple devices like iPad Pro, MacBook Pro, Watch Series 10, the AirPods Pro. So we're just going to add all this in, and we can easily do that by using a grid. So let's begin. Okay, so first off, we select our column, and then we head over to our library and insert a grid. So we can find this within the box component. So we'll go over here, select grid, and nice. Now we have a grid. So we're going to work on our grid. First thing we're going to work on is to change this, the grid columns. We're going to change this to 2FR. Okay. Then we're going to add another one. So we want it to be 2FR, 2FR. Right. So it's split into two columns. Two columns each. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is add in our sections. So for now, what we can just do is add in the section from here because it looks closest to what we have going on here and here, which is with the built for intelligence section text. So let's just add that in. So we'll go over here. We can duplicate this and then move it into the grid. Okay, let's move it inside. There we go. And now we have it sitting nicely here. So first things first, we're going to change the text here. So we'll come over here to the text. We change this from size 21 to 14. Then we try and look for any other difference we can notice between the two. I think besides that, every other thing remains the same. So let's go ahead and make this look more like what we have over here, our iPad Pro. So first, we can start with the text, copy this. We go over here and change the text to iPad Pro. Also, our subheading over here. Change this to unbelievably thin, incredibly powerful. Nice. Next thing we're going to change is our background. So we select the iPad Pro. But first, before we change the background, let's quickly change the text. So we change this to have a white text. Right. Then we change the background. So it has the background for the iPad Pro. So the images for grid sections here will be under the promo photos. So over here in the promo photos, we'll look for our iPad Pro. Here we go. And we select this. And now we have the section looking identical to what we have here. Besides one thing, actually, we still need a padding. The grid still needs a padding. So we're going to add that in as well. So we'll go over here to the grid and then add a padding. We go to spacing and size, padding. So the padding is going to be on the horizontal side. So come over here and give it a padding of 12 pixels. There we go. Now it looks closer to what we have here. I think the last thing we need to work on is the font size. Maybe let's check. Right. So our font size is currently 0.7 rem, which is larger than what we want. So we want it to be more like 21 pixels. Let's change this here as well. 21 pixels. And let's also check the heading. This might also be larger than what we want. Okay, so this has a size of 40 pixels. Let's go over here and change the heading size to be 40 pixels. Now we have something that's identical. So now we can actually start duplicating these sections. First of all, let's rename this to our iPad Pro. So let's click this and rename it to iPad Pro. Then we can start duplicating this section and then working on each of them individually. I'm going to do that now. So come over here, we'll duplicate this. Okay, we add another duplicate. Or you know what, let's have 3 duplicates because we would eventually need to remove the text here, and then for the remaining sections that won't have the Apple Intelligence, so we'll just leave it like that. Okay, so let's have 3. So let's change this to our MacBook Pro. So come over here, rename this to MacBook Pro. Nice. And we'll also rename the text. Then we'll come over here and copy this. Nice. Now we can change the background to what we have in the final product. So now we change this to a MacBook Pro. Nice. So we just keep going on, just keep going for the remaining. So for this one, it's going to be a bit different. We're going to, first off, let's change the text. So this has a text of Apple Watch Series 10. But if you notice, this is not actual text, this is an image. So in order to implement this feature, what we're going to do is we're going to have an image or a block with the background image that's going to show this logo. Then we're going to have the actual heading be there for accessibility purposes, but it will only be set for to screen readers, right? So only screen readers will be able to read the heading. And then we have this background image over here. So let's do that. So let's go over here to the iPad. Let's rename this to Apple Watch Series 10. Nice. Now let's change the actual text. Let's go over here and change the text to Apple Watch Series 10. So what we have here, we're just going to copy it and then paste it here. Right. Like I said before, we don't want this to be visible. We only want this to be read by screen readers. And to do this, luckily for us, we have a Tailwind utility class that helps us do just that. So we're going to go over here to the heading, click on the classes field, and add in a Tailwind utility class called SR only. What this does is just make sure it's not visible on to a user, but the screen reader can read it, and that is helpful for accessibility purposes. If a web crawler wants to see what is actually on there or what this section is representing. Okay, now we're going to add a block. So go over here to components, box, add a block. I'm going to move this block up. Now this block is going to have a width of 88%. 88%, and it's going to have a height of 57 pixels. And it's going to have the background image as the logo we have over in our final result. So that's the Apple Watch Series 10 logo. So you see promo logo Apple Watch Series 10. Select this, click on open. And I think we might need to work on this a little. Let's see. So the height is 57 and okay, this is it. So let's try to set this to contain. Okay. And then we set this to 50%. Nice. Next, let's change the background. This background we currently have is not what we want. So we set this to be the Apple Watch background. There we go. And lastly, we change the text to be a black text. Change this to black. And we'll change the text content as well. So select this. We change the text. Nice. The last thing we're going to do is remove the Apple Intelligence text over here. So we don't need to change any other thing. All we just need to do is just come over here and delete this text, and everything else just remains the way it is. And with this, we can now move over to AirPods Pro. So we need a copy of this, or we can use a copy of this since this is more similar to what we have here, with the only difference being the text at the bottom rather than at the top. So we can go over here to the MacBook Pro, duplicate this, bring it over here, delete the Apple Intelligence text. Then we set the justify content here to end, right? And now we have it at the bottom. Let's change the name. So we change the name to AirPods Pro 2. Change this here to AirPods Pro 2. Next, we set it over here to AirPods Pro 2 as well. We'll give it that text. Nice. And then the name as well, the subheading as well. So we change this to now with a hearing aid feature. Nice. Now the last thing we need to do is change the background. And so we change the background to AirPods Pro 2. And there we go. Now we have a nice looking grid section, but we're almost done. We're not quite done yet. So we still have to work on these two. So to do that, we're going to duplicate the Apple Watch Series 10 section. So we'll duplicate it, move it all the way down. And this will be our section for our trading. Similar to what we did in our watch section, we're going to have our trading section use. So we'll name this first of all, we'll name this Apple Trading. Nice. And now we're going to have our Apple Trading section also use the image and screen reader only heading. And we're going to change the background here. So we'll change the background to be the trading logo. Over here, we'll look for trading logo. So we have iPhone trading. There we go. Change the height. So change this from a height of 57 to 32. There we go. Then I can also change the subheading. This. Sorry. Change this to what we have here. But then we need to change the max width so it flows down like what we have over here. So we change the max width to 315. Change the max width to 315. And I think we're done. Yeah, I think we're done. We have it looking exactly like what we have here. But the last thing we need to do is just change the background. We'll go over here, change the background to Apple Trading. That's here. And there we go. Now for our final section is the Apple Card. So basically the same thing, duplicate. Change this to Apple Card. I just realized one thing I forgot to do is change the heading. So we go over here to the heading and change this from Apple Watch Series 10 to Apple Trade In. So it's representing the correct section. And then over here, we do the same thing. We change the heading to Apple Card. This time we can start with the background, change the background, go over here, change the background to be the Apple Card background. Right? We change the image to be the logo image to be the Apple Card logo. Then under logos, we have the Apple Card and we add that in. Nice. And then we change our subheading over here. There we go. Now we have it looking nice and clean. So we're done with our grid section, at least for the desktop version, but we still need to work on the mobile version of this. So if you go over here to the mobile version, so tablet, you see it still looks nice. But the moment we go over to our mobile version, we see it start to break down. So we need to adjust this screen for mobile landscape and below. So we'll start from the top. First off, we don't want this video here when the user is on the mobile screen. So we'll start adjusting all the styles for mobile responsiveness from the top to the bottom. All right, so let's start with the iPhone 16 Pro section. So select the section. And what we're going to do here first is set the height to something different. So we're going to set the height to be from what we have here to something else. So first off, before we start doing anything, let's select the mobile portrait breakpoint. So this is targeted for mobile devices at 30 rem or below. With that selected, let's also select the state And then let's set the height to be a height of 700 pixels. There we go. All right, the next thing we're going to do is change the background and also disable the video player. So let's start off with the video player. So we want it that when it's on mobile devices, it isn't displayed. So we set it to display none. Next thing we want to do is go back to the iPhone 16 Pro section and change the background to have a black background. So we have, and I think that's already set, but just to make sure, go over here and set to have a black background. Nice. Next, we're going to have a background image. We'll go over here, select the image, and it's going to be the hero end frame promo photo. So over here, we have hero end frame under the promo photos folder. Select that. That's what we're going to have as our background. We'll set it to contain and we'll set the Y value to 50%. So it's nicely centered. And there you go. Now we have something nice that looks more like what we have going on over here, smaller devices. Now we're going to move on to the rest. We can see here on mobile, it has a different image from what we have here. This image on mobile devices cuts out the iPhone. So we're going to change it. So it displays the vertical version. So we're going to change the background here. We're going to set it to be the promo photo of the iPhone 16. So before we're using the hero photo, now we'll be changing it to the promo. So we'll go over here, select the iPhone 16 promo, and we're good. All right, let's also check to see if there's any other thing we need to change. I think that's it. And I think we're good to go. We're going to work on the grid next. Or just, yeah, we're going to work on the grid next. So let's go over to the grid, select the grid over here. And for mobile devices, we want the grid to, for mobile devices, starting from mobile landscape actually. So that's for tablets. We want it to go from a grid to a flex. So we'll set this to flex, right? Then we set this to column. So direction top to bottom. So you can already see it's looking a bit nice. Another thing we want to do is remove the padding on the left and right side. So we go over here to padding horizontal and we set this to 0. There we go. And so the last thing we're going to do now is edit the padding for the section class. So let's select any of these sections. So we can select the iPhone 16. There we go. So with the iPhone 16 selected, let's head over to the section class, select the section class in the classes field. And then on mobile devices, so select mobile portrait. We're going to set this to have a padding of 0. If you check over here without this selected, you can see it has a padding of 47. So we still want the padding up and down, right? The padding at the top and the bottom to be 47. But the ones at the side, the horizontal padding, we're going to set this to 0. Right, and this ensures that when we are dealing with screen sizes that are less than 480, the padding doesn't resize it in any crazy way. Right, and with that, we're done with our grid section. In the next section, we're going to go into working on the carousel. So if you head over here, you can see we have a nice carousel. You can play it over here. You can see it scrolls automatically. You can go over here, scroll. So want to have something like this. So yeah, in the next section, we'll do this and we'll also work on this section as well. So yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next section. All right, let's get started. So the first component we're going to add to our page is the carousels. Now, just like the previous sections we added to our page, Clutch also provides a set of carousels or carousel variants that we can make use of to implement these carousels you see here. Okay, we're going to head over to the library and then we're going to go over to our components. And then if you scroll over to your carousel, now we have our carousels or our carousel variants. We have here one with the just a regular carousel, one that aligns the carousel items vertically, one with thumbnails and the rest. So what we are looking for are two main variants. The regular carousel, so let's add that in. And we're going to be adding this to our column as well. So this is all going to be within the column. Right. So we'll add it to our column, and then we add another carousel. So the second carousel is going to be a carousel with controls, which is the play and pause controls. Let's add that in. So what we're going to do here is really simple. We're going to use the controls over here to control this carousel. So we're going to move these controls over to this component, and these controls will control this carousel. So when we play the carousel using this button, it begins to move, right? So we can see it starts moving. So that's what we're trying to implement. And then by the time we remove these controls, we're just going to have this with no controls and have it scroll automatically. So that's what we're going to be doing. So let's get started with that. So first things first, we're going to work on this carousel. And to do that, we'll start with the controls. Let's just move the controls over to this side so we can have a fresh slate to start with. So we'll come over here. We'll move the control over to this side. Right. And then we're just going to name this. We're just going to name these controls. And then we have some other controls over here. We're just going to remove this because we don't need this. And we're going to leave this here because these are indicators. Okay, so we're going to leave it exactly like this. All right, so let's start with the carousel, the first carousel. So this one is going to be our auto scroll carousel, and then this would just be our normal carousel. Okay, first thing we're going to work on here is the carousel, the main container. We're going to go over here to the properties panel and add a few properties. First property we're going to add is the loop property, and the next property we're going to add is the autoplay property. So we can find that, okay, it's already added. Okay, we're going to need these two properties. So first things first, we'll set this, make sure this is set to true. Then also make sure the loop property is set to true. So when we do it this way, that means when we're scrolling through the carousel, it loops over. So you can see here we have the last one, and the next one is going to be the first one over here. So that's what the loop does. So we set both properties to true. Then we give our carousel a position of relative, because later on we're going to position some of the controls using absolute positioning, and that will be relative to this carousel. Okay, next let's move on to the carousel viewport, and let's give it a height. So the carousel viewport just basically shows the part of the carousel that is going to be shown to the user. We want to give this a height of 523 pixels. So we'll go over here to the height, and we'll give it 523 pixels. Great. Now we're going to go under here to the carousel slides. And you know what? I'm just going to open all this up. So we'll select the carousel slides and we're going to give it a height of 100%. So go over here to height and give it a height of 100%. Nice. The next thing we want to do is work on a single carousel slide. So we're going to delete the remaining here and just work on a single one. I might duplicate this one later on, but for now, let's just work on this single carousel slide. So the first thing we're going to do is set the width of the carousel slide. Now, I want the width of the carousel slide to be quite large, so we're going to click the carousel slide, go over to the basis, and give it a basis width of 995 pixels. Next, we're going to make sure it's set to be a block, okay? Then make sure it has a position of relative. The next one we're going to do is give it a full height, so we'll give it height 100%. Okay, now we're going to try and make sure that when the carousel is visible, it displays like normal. But when it's not the current carousel being displayed, we give it a, we make it transparent. We give it a transparency or reduce the opacity to a certain level. So we have something like this where when it's not visible, you can't really see it as clearly compared to when it becomes the current item. So let's do that. To do that, we're going to scroll down over here to our effects section. We're going to add the opacity effect. We're going to set this to be on 0.4. So this is how it's going to be by default. Now we're going to add a transition as well. So we'll add a transition, and by default we have this value. So we're just going to change this to 0.6 seconds for the duration. Nice. So the next thing we're going to do is modify the styles for the carousel when it's in the current state. So we'll go over here to the state field, click on current. So now any styles we apply here will apply to the carousel when it's the current one being viewed. And all we need to do here is just set the opacity to 1. So now whenever it is visible, it's going to be completely opaque. Cool. Next, let's move on to the carousel image. Now this image, we want it to be wrapped around a block. So let's wrap it around the block. And that block is going to have a name. We're going to call it carousel image container. And now we're going to give this container a position of relative. We'll go over here, give it a relative position. We're going to make sure that the top is 0 pixels and the right as well is also set to 0 pixels. Next, we're going to give it a height, a full height, so a height of 100%. Nice. And then we're going to move on to our image. So we select the image, and then you make sure it has a height of 100% and a width of 100% as well. We'll go over here, 100%. Right, so now it covers the entire slide width. Okay, now we're going to add something else. We're going to add a gradient within this container. So we're going to come over here and add a block. So we can just hit Command B, or we can add one from the library. Let's add one from the library. So we'll go over here to components, to box, and then we add our block. Nice. Now this block is going to serve as our gradient for our image. So we'll head over here to the properties panel. We give it a position of absolute. We give it a top value of 0 pixels. We also give the right a value of 0 pixels. We give it a width of 100%. We also give the height 100%. And then we add a nice linear gradient over here. So we could work on this manually, but what we could also do is just enter the code value directly. So we can go over here to the actual website and inspect any of the carousel slides. And then we have it here, carousel slide gradient. We copy the gradient. And then we enter that in here as the code. Enter that in here as the code. And now we have a nice gradient being applied. A subtle gradient that starts from the bottom up and then goes transparent from the top. So now with this website in here, let's create another container. So this container is going to be a row. So let's go over here and add in a row. Now this row is going to contain the information about the current media, be it whether it's a series or the current series that we're going to be viewing. So let's head over here and add, we can call this a carousel slide info. So let's rename this to carousel slide info. Let's head over to the properties panel and give this align items property value of center. And then we'll also add a gap. So we're going to give this a gap of 18 pixels. Next, we're going to make sure that it's positioned absolute. Then you get a bottom of 38 pixels and left of 47 pixels. We're just going to make sure right here that the top and the right are given 0 pixels respective. Okay, nice. Now we're going to make sure that it's not visible, right, initially. So we're going to give this an opacity of 0. So we'll go over here. Similar to what we're doing with our carousel slide image, we don't want it to be visible unless the user has navigated to the slide. So we set the opacity to 0. Right, then we're also going to add a transform Y property. So go over here to transform or translate. The transform translate. So we want to add a translate value. So we want to shift it to the bottom. So we'll give this a value of 20 pixels. Right. And then we'll add a custom transition as well. Okay. And this transition will also have a duration of 0.6 seconds. Nice. Okay. So once we're done with that, we're going to have to create a new state that basically targets this carousel slide info. Let's head over to state and create a new state. We're going to call this state current. And then we select the state. And then we'll call it current. We're going to add a value here. So this value is basically a selector that targets the current element. So here we're going to change this to area current and then add an ampersand. And with the ampersand being referring to the current element. So what this means is when the parent element has an area current attribute, right, we should apply some certain styles. So this selector basically just dictates that. So now all we're just going to do is say when we're in the current slide, we're going to go over here to the translate and set this to 0. And then we also go to opacity. So we add the opacity and make sure that this is set to 1. So when is the current one being viewed? We want to make sure that it's going to be visible. All right. So with that done, let's actually start adding in the details for a carousel info. So the first thing we're going to add is a button. So we can go over to the top here and select this button and then copy it. Then we can come all the way down here and paste it. We can come here to slide info. And then let's add in our button. So paste the button. Right. And then we add our text as well. Nice. So let's make sure this is centered. So we go over here, align items, center. This should still have a margin. Okay, maybe align items and then it should be a row, right? So this should be row and then okay, I guess it's the height that is causing the issue here. So the height should just be max content and then we have align items center. Nice. Now as for our text, we're going to give this a value of, so we can go over here to see what value we have, and this is 20 pixels. So I'm going to give this text a value of 20 pixels. So we can easily do that by going over here and giving it a size of 20 pixels. And with that, we have our, I think we can say stream now. Let me confirm that's what's correct. Right, stream now. And that's it for our carousel, I hope. Next, we're going to add in the background images and just make sure everything works correctly. So first things first, we'll go up over here and duplicate this slide. Or first of all, let's add in the background image. So we'll go over here to our image and then we change the image to one of the Apple TV series images. So we'll go to TV plus gallery. Then we add your friends and neighbors. Right. And now we have something nice looking like this, looking very similar to what we have here. All right. So before we move on, let's head over back to the properties panel while the image is selected and make sure that the alt text is correct. So I'm going to set this alt text to your friends and neighbors, just basically making sure it's describing the correct thing. So your friends and neighbors, and then we're going to set the object fit, that's for the image, set it to cover. And with that, we should now have a complete carousel slide. So to test it, we're just going to duplicate a few of these. So we'll add about 6 Right, so that's 6 carousel items. I'm just going to navigate through each of them and see what happens. So when we go through this one, you see this happens. Go through this one, see this happens. Right. Okay, so we know now that it works the way it's supposed to work. I can notice a little sliding going on here. I don't know, this might be a bug from the carousel component, but so actually it's not a bug. I think I realized the issue going on here. We need to set the transition for our slides. We need to change it. So let's go over here to the carousel slide. And you know what? Let's first delete these two. So select and then delete. Next, let's go over here to the transition property. So we select the carousel slide. We select the transition property. Then let's change this from all to opacity. So with that selected, this problem should now no longer exist. So let's try duplicating a bunch of them and then let's check it out. So now you should no longer have that error or that bug coming up anymore. Okay. Let's delete the previous slides we have. All right. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is the responsiveness. We're going to make sure that this looks responsive in mobile view. So right now, if you head over here to the responsive view, the mobile portrait view, we're going to see that it looks really bad. So let's work on this. So the first thing we're going to change is the carousel viewport height. So we need to select the mobile state, and then we're going to change this height from 523 to 236 pixels. Okay, cool. The next thing we're going to do is head over to the individual carousel slide, and then we're going to change the basis. So we're going to change this basis from 995 pixels to calc 100% minus 50 pixels. So the full width of the carousel slide is minus 50 pixels. And now we have something nice going on like this. Next, we're going to select the image. We're going to make sure that on mobile, the object fit goes from cover to contain, so it looks even nicer. And lastly, we're going to make sure that the gradient, so we'll look for our gradient here, that this gradient is not being displayed. So we're going to click on the block here, or we can even rename this to carousel slide gradient first. So we have carousel slide gradient, and we're going to make sure this is not being displayed on mobile screens. So display none. Right, and we can see the difference here. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is go over to our carousel slide info. And we want to make sure that this looks a bit different from what we currently have. So we're going to go over here to the carousel slide info. We're going to change some things. So the first thing we're going to change is the display. We're going to make sure that it's not being displayed. So we only want to display it when the user actually hovers over the item. So for now, we're going to set display to none. Next, we're going to adjust the width. Let's go over here to the width and set it to a value of calc 100% minus 16 pixels. Cool. Next, let's work on the height. We're going to give it a height of 100%. Nice. Next, we're going to give it a bottom value of 0. So we're going to go over up here to the bottom and give it a value of 0 pixels, and also give the left a value of 16 pixels. Nice. Now I'm going to make sure that the transform property that we added in the desktop version will not exist in the mobile. So it just stays centered the way it should be. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is create a new state for our carousel slide info. Now this state is basically going to be a selector that targets the carousel slide info when we hover over the carousel item. So to do that, we're going to go over here to the state field. We're going to select, actually just try and create one. So we're just going to type one. We're going to call this parent hover. Click enter. And now we're going to set the value to be dot carousel slide hover and then ampersand. What that means is when the user hovers over the slide, then we apply some certain styles to this carousel slide info. Okay, what styles do we want to apply? We want to make this from hidden, we want to set this display to be flex. The next thing we want to do is set the background color to be a black color, but with an alpha value of 65%. And now let's test our changes. So now when the user hovers over the slide, okay, it still doesn't work, but let's check this out. Let's see what's going on. Carousel slide hover, okay. So this is happening because we haven't applied the class to the carousel slide yet. So what we're going to do here is just go over to instance style and then convert it to a class. Okay, cool. And with that, if we test this out, hit play, yeah, we should have something looking like this. So now I'm going to clean up the carousel slide info a bit more. So we select it. So now let's check out what's going on here. Okay, we need to center it. So I'm going to set justify, click on the parent hover first. Now we're going to set justify contents to center. So if we do that, right, we can see it looks a bit better. But to go even further, we're going to set the direction to bottom to top. So this is column bottom to top. And let's see. And I think as a last change, we're going to select the text within the carousel side info and just make sure that the text is aligned to the center. So if you have a text more than just default text, it can be aligned to the center over here. And that's basically it. And with that, we're done with the responsive version of our slide. Right, so we haven't duplicated this in other places yet. So let's just do that real quick. So we'll come over here and we'll delete these slides. And now if we duplicate this one, we'll duplicate a bunch of them. We can see now that our slide looks more like what we want. Nice. So now we've worked on our individual carousel slides and we have something nice going on. We still need to add a few things. And first off, we need to change the text and the images for the other slides. For example, let's create another slide here. Let's just delete the ones we have here and then create a new one or duplicate this one. Right. So for this one, it's going to display the studio. It's going to have a different text and a different background image. We're going to do this for all the remaining slides. So we have a full carousel going on. So we select this slide. We go over here to the carousel slide. We click the image. And then we change this image from your friends and neighbors to the studio. Cool. We can also change the alt text here to the studio. And we're also going to change the text to what we have in the actual website. So here we have Seth Rogen dives into this. So we can just copy this, come over here, and we can paste this over here. So we select this and we paste it. Then we can also add here comedy. I believe this is a comedy genre. And yeah, we add this over here. And something cool we can also do here is set this text section to be bold. So we just select it and then this pops over and then we can select bold. And now this looks more like what we were looking for. And then we can also select this and do the same for it. So here we have drama, live your best lie. And then we can select this, go over here, select this, and then paste it. Then we can select this portion and make it bold. And so this is what we're going to be doing for the rest of the sections, just to make them match what we have over here. All right, so now we have all our carousel slides in. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the indicators. Right, so just to test again, we can see on mobile screens, it looks really nice. That's the carousel slides. Okay, let's begin working on the indicators now. That's the buttons over here. So first things first, we click on this row, the row above the carousel. We'll rename this to indicators container, just so we can understand that this is the container for our indicators. All right. The next thing we're going to do is style this a bit. So we're going to go over here to the properties panel. We make sure that display is set to flex. The align items is set to center, and the justify content is set to center. So now we can see it's centered right over here. The next thing we're going to do is add some padding. So we'll add a bit of padding to the left and the right side. We'll add some padding of 12 pixels. Okay. So we have a padding the top and the bottom of 12 pixels. This is just to increase the spacing between these sections. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is work on this row. So we're going to name this row indicators. So this is the actual container for the list of the indicators. Now we're going to make this flex, make sure it's flex, make sure the align items is set to center. So I'm going to give this a gap of spacing 3.5, which is 14 pixels. Right, once that's done, we can now begin working on each individual carousel indicator. So over here, you can see there's a loop primitive that takes in the scroll snap list, which contains the number of carousel items. And then for each of them, we render an indicator. Now we're going to select one of the block within the indicator, and we're going to style this. And when we style this, is going to end up styling every single one of these. With the block selected, let's go over here to the width and set it to spacing 2. So that's 8 pixels. So select this, set into spacing 2. So now we can see we have these smaller circles over here. Now we're going to change the background. So I'm going to give it a black background, but one with a little bit of transparency. So we'll give this an alpha value of 42%. There we go. The next thing we're going to do is give it a border as well. So we can leave the border here as this color, but we could also change it. So let's try changing it. Let's give it a border of black again, and then set this to 42%. Okay, after that, we're going to add a transition. So we'll go over here to effect, add transition, and then reduce this from 0.3 seconds to 0.1 seconds. And with that, the goal of that is when a carousel indicator is currently selected, we want it to have a black background. But then when it's not selected, we want to have this gray background that it currently has. So to set it to have the black background when it's selected, let's go over here to the selected state. So we select the selected state here. Next, we're going to set the background color to be a black color. So a black 80% alpha value. There we go. And we're also going to give it a black, the same color for the border. So black 80%. There we go. So now when we go from one slide to another, we have this nice change in color and transition. All right. So the next element we're going to work on is the controls. So for the controls, we're going to make use of the if primitive, because if you go over here to the website, we display the control play button when the carousel is currently paused. But if you hit play, it changes to the carousel paused. So we want to use an if primitive to display this based on whether the carousel is currently playing or not. So to do that, we're going to make use of two if primitives. So I'm going to go over here and we're going to add two if primitives. So we'll go here, We'll go over to components, to logic. Then we add an if, and then we duplicate this. Right. Now we're going to move this up over here and move this up here as well. We're going to move this carousel play into this if block, and then move the carousel stop into the second if primitive. Next, let's work on the condition. So with one of the if statements selected, with the carousel play if selected, let's go over to the conditions, select the green icon here, and we want the carousel play icon to show when the carousel is not playing. So we're going to use the if false function, and then we're going to set the value to be is playing here for the carousel. So when the carousel isn't playing, that's when we want the button to be available for playing. Okay, now we're going to do the opposite for the second if statement. So we only want this to show the carousel stop button when it's currently playing. So to do that, we'll go over here and then we'll set it to, we'll look for our carousel and then we set the state to is playing. And with that, this is only going to be visible when the carousel is currently playing. So to test that, we're just going to come over here and test. So we can see this works correctly. Right. Now we're going to try and position it properly. We're going to select the controls. We're going to go over to the properties panel and give it a position of absolute, because we want the button to be somewhere around here. So we're going to try and do that now. So we'll give it a position of absolute. We're going to set the right value to 16 pixels. We're going to set the bottom value to minus 277 pixels. And when we do that, we're going to have something looking like this. So right now it still looks weird, but don't worry, once we work on the auto scroll carousel, we're going to have something looking much neater. Okay, so with that done, let's now work on the carousel button style itself. So we'll go over here to the carousel play, we select the button, and now I'm going to make a few changes. First things first is width and height. We're going to change this from, okay, so it's already on 24 pixels. Okay, so we want it to be that size. Next thing, we're going to change the background. So we're going to change the background of the button. So select here. Now we change the background to D7. And let's try that again. So we're going to set this to D2, D2, D7. This is going to give us a gray background for our button. The next thing we're going to do is make sure the radius is set to 9,000. Okay, and we already have that there. Okay, now we're going to work on the icons. But before we do that, let's actually extract the class for this button so we can apply it to the other button here for the carousel stop. So let's select the button. Let's extract, convert to class. We're going to call this button control button. Okay, so now we're going to apply this control button class to our carousel stop button. So to do that, we're just going to select our button over here. Select the button, and then we go over here to the classes. We clear the instance styles, and then we add our control button. Select that, and now stop button would also look similar to our play button. So let's test that out. Let's check and confirm. Okay, so we can refresh this. Okay, and so with that, our pause button would also have the same controls. Now let's go over to the individual icons to style them. So for our play icon, select it. So let's try and refresh to make sure we're seeing the play icon right now. And then let's try playing and pausing this. So now it's being paused. So now we're going to select the play icon, and we're going to add some properties here over in the property panel. So we'll add a fill. We'll give the fill a black color. We can just enter black here manually. And we can also give it a color of black. Next, I'm going to add a stroke width property and give this stroke width 0. And so with that, we have a dark looking icon over here. Other thing we're going to do is reduce the size. So we're going to move this from 16 pixels to 14 pixels. So we'll look for 14 pixels here, 3.5. Then we set that as the width. And also the same thing for the height. Let's see if we can say 3.5. Right. We'll select this. And now we have a smaller looking icon. And we're just going to apply the same thing to the pause icon. So we're going to convert this class to control icon. And we'll go over here to the pause icon. And we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to add here the control icon. And now it's going to have those styles. And then we'll also do the same thing regarding the properties. So we set this to black. We set the stroke width to 0. Then we also set the fill to black. With that, now if you refresh, you should have our pause icon looking nice over here. And so that's it for our control buttons. Now let's move on to the next item, which is the carousel. So right now we can't even interact with this button because of the carousel over here. So to fix that, we're going to work on this carousel and reduce the height and just work on it overall to make it look like what we want, which is what we have over here. Okay, so let's select the carousel. Then we're going to add a few properties here, just what we did with the original carousel. So we're going to add the loop property, set it to true. We're also going to add the autoplay property. And we'll make sure this is set to false. Then we're going to add the auto scroll property. So this is what enables the auto scrolling that you see here. Right. So we're going to add the auto scroll property and set it to true. The next thing we're going to add is a margin top. So we can see this is distant from what we have up here. So we want to make this closer to the carousel over here. So we're going to set the margin top to -12 pixels. Okay, there we go. Next, we're going to give it a margin bottom of 56 pixels. And we're going to give it a width of 100%. Nice. So now it takes the max width of the page. Okay, next we're going to work on the viewport. We don't want this carousel to be as big as the one over here. So we're going to reduce the viewport height. We're going to set this to 236 pixels. Nice. We're also going to work on the carousel slides. So we'll select the carousel slides and we'll set this to a height of 100%. So we'll make sure it takes 100% of the height. Next, let's work on these rows over here. So we don't need this next and previous controls. So we're just going to select this and delete this. Okay. Once we've done that and the page has refreshed, you should see now that it's no longer being displayed. Now we're going to work on the individual slide. Now let's delete these slides because we don't need them. We only need one to work on and then move from there. Okay, so with the slide selected, let's give it a width. So over here in the properties panel, we're going to give it a width. We're going to change the basis. We're going to give it a width of 417 pixels. Nice. We're also going to make the position relative. So over here in layout, we set the position to relative. We're going to give it a height of 100%. Nice. The next one we're going to do is add in a block. So kind of like what we did before. We wrap this in a block. Wrap the image in a block. So we'll go over here, we add a block. Right. Now within the block, we're just going to give the block a relative position. Okay. And actually, no, we won't give it a relative position. This is just going to be a container. So it's going to be a container for image and slide gradients. So let's just leave it as static. So we'll add in our image, and let's go over here and add an example image. So we'll go over here to the FEM gallery and we'll add the first one, Balatro. Okay, that should work now. Okay. Now we're going to change the styles for the image. So we're going to give it a width of 100% and a height of 100% as well. So we remove this token value and we set the height to 100%. And now the next thing we're going to do is set the object fit to cover. And now we should have the carousel slide looking closer to what we want. Now what we're going to do is add in some text and these SVG images for each slide. So let's start with the current slide here. So I'm going to add the text. So we'll go over here and add a text. And we're also going to add an SVG. So over here, we search for SVG and we add it in. Okay, so for the text, let's set it to bilateral plus. And we're going to give it a position, an absolute position. We're going to set the bottom to be 15 pixels. We're going to set the left value to be 15 pixels as well. And then we're going to add a padding of 15 pixels. A padding left to be exact. Okay, let's clear the value here. Select clear value. And then over here, we're going to add a padding of 15 pixels. Right, and so now we have our text sitting nicely here. The next one we're going to position is the SVG. So over here in the SVG, we're going to give it similar to what we have with the text. We're going to give it an absolute position. So we set it here to absolute. We're going to give it a bottom of 15 pixels, left of 15 pixels as well. Now we need to work on the size. We're going to make it an image of 68 pixel width. Then we're also going to give it a height of 14 pixels. Right, and now we need to position it properly. So right now it's not really being positioned properly. So let's remove the left value we added here earlier. Let's clear this. Okay. And now we're going to make it a right value. So rather than left, we're going to make this 15 pixels. And so now we have it looking much better. Okay. And bottom would also be changed to 20 pixels. Right. That looks way nicer. So now let's change the logo to our Apple Arcade logo. So we'll go over here to the logos folder and we select the Apple Arcade. And this should work in a moment. Right. So right now it's still black. So I'm going to add in a fill property. So we'll go down over here to custom styles, add in the fill property and set it to white. And now we have our carousel slide for the auto scroll carousel. And now we can just duplicate this bunch of times and then fill it in with the text and logo values for yes. So you can already see it scrolling. So now all what we just need to do is set each text and background and logo to the correct ones. So for example, we can start with this one. We can go over here to the second slide and then we're going to change the text to, so let's see what we have over here. So we can change this here to PGA Tour Pro Golf. Okay, so we can change this here to PGA Tour Pro Golf. And we also change the background. So we'll go over here to the block, select the image, and we're going to change the background to be what we have in the finished website. So here we have PGA Tour. Select that. You can also rename this to PGA tall, and then set the one for the bilateral as well. So we'll make sure the image alt text is set to bilateral. There we go. And with that, we have it looking much nicer. And although I am not seeing the height does look a bit weird, so let's check that out to see what's going on. Let's see what we have going on here. And we have a bottom of 20. Okay, so let's confirm we have the same thing going over here. This should have a bottom of 20 pixels. So it does. So I guess the issue here is with the height. Okay, so let's select the block and give it a width of 100%. And also give it a height of 100%. Right, so we can fix that issue across the board. And now what we can do is just replicate this on the other slides. So select this and do the same thing. For now, we only need these two, so let's just leave them at that. Let's delete these other three and delete. So now we have just these two. Now what we're going to do is refresh the page. Okay, so we have just these two. Now what we're going to do is add in one more. So we'll add in the Apple Fitness Plus. So duplicate this. Okay, and once you duplicate that, let's change the image. So we'll go over here to the image and change it to the Strength with Greg image. And we can just change the alt text here real quick. Strength with Greg. And now we can change the text as well to yoga. Okay, so we can change it to yoga that's easy on your knees and wrists. I think we just need to set this to be, and that's everything. And lastly, we're going to change the SVG. So we need this to be the Apple Fitness Plus logo. So we'll change this. I will set it to the Apple Fitness logo over here under the logos folder. Okay, I think this is the wrong text. Or actually, it's the wrong image and the wrong text. This is the wrong text. So this should just be Strength with Greg. And then we need to work on the slide text. So we need to increase the boldness. So I'm going to go over here and set the boldness to be 600. Right, and with that, we also need to change the text size to text small. So that's the text SM token over here. We're going to duplicate this with the other slides. So over here, we do the same thing. Set the size to text SM and set the width to 600. And we'll do the same thing over here as well. Set the size to SM and set the width to 600. There we go. And now we have it looking more like what we have here. And with that done, all we're just going to do next is add in the remaining sections. So the yoga that's easy on your knees, the flower plus, every other section that's here, we're just going to go and add them. And we will continue from there. All right, so with the auto scroll carousel complete, let's move on to the last section of our Apple homepage, which is going to be the footer. So we want a footer that looks something a bit like this. So to do this, let's just get right in and add a footer section. So go over here to insert, and then we're going to add a footer section. So yeah, we're going to look for a section that looks closest to what we're trying to add. And we have the footer variant over here. Let's add that in. And now we have our footer, but it seems to be up over here. So let's move it down below the column. And if we do that and just wait for it to load a bit, and yeah, now we have our footer. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is give our footer a lighter color for its background. So we're going to head over to the properties panel, and we're going to set the background color to be a light background. So we're going to give this an F5, F5, F7 hex color. Okay, next we're going to set the text color to a black color. but with a alpha value of 56%. And now we have something looking nicer here. The next thing we're going to do is delete this form element over here. So select the form and hit delete. Okay, nice. Now we have something looking a bit better. Now we're going to add a column for the text above the column links over here. We're also going to set the forms and links value to be a column. So we want the direction to be top to bottom, so a flex column. And we also want the gapping to be from 8 to 5. So we want to set it from spacing 8 to spacing 5. Nice. Now we're going to go back to our column container over here, and we're going to make a few changes. The first thing we're going to change is the spacing or the gap. We're going to change the gap from spacing 20 to spacing 5, which is 20 pixels. Next, we're going to set the height to be 100%. Okay, nice. We're also going to set the justify contents to be space between. So we have some distance between these two here. Okay, that works. Now we're going to adjust the padding for the footer itself. So let's select the footer over here. We're going to set the padding to be 22 pixels. So we'll set the padding over here to 22 pixels. And then we want the padding top to be 17 pixels. Now we need to start adding in our text and every other thing we need. So let's add in 7 text elements here. Can wait for it to load a bit. There we go. And now we have 7 text elements. And what we're just going to do now is fill in every single text here with the correct text that corresponds to what we have on our website. But before we do that, let's quickly add in a separator. And this separator is going to be between the column up over here and the column down over here. But it doesn't seem to be ordered properly. So let's figure out what's going on there. So we can check here and make sure everything is okay. Let's hit refresh just to make sure everything is displaying properly. Okay, nice. So we have it displaying properly now. So now let's also work on this column. Let's adjust the gap. So we're going to set the gap value to be 10 pixels, which is going to be spacing 2. Or sorry, spacing 2.5. So we'll change this to spacing 2.5. Nice. Another thing I noticed that we need to change is the text size. So I'm going to change this text size from 14 to 12. So I'm going to change this here, or from 16 to 12. I'm going to change this here from base to text extra small. And with that, we're mostly done. All we need to do now is give each of these column titles a black color. So we'll select each title. We'll give it a black text color. So we'll set this to black. Do the same thing here. Set it to black. And the last column here also sets to black. Right. Then we can change this text over here to Apple. And now we can start filling out each of the sections here with what we have here. So we can start off with this text, then select the first text here, and then we put in the value we just got. And then we're just going to do this for the rest of the sections and just fill in the correct text values from the finished website. Okay, so if you've been adding the text, you might have noticed an issue with this dark background appearing at the bottom over here. To fix this issue, let's just go over to our footer and delete the section class. So we'll go over here and delete this class. And once you do that, it should fix the issue right away. Okay, so now let's keep adding the text. So over here, we have most of the text being added. And we'll do that for the remainder of the text, and we should have our complete nav bar. Okay, now we've added our text. Let's make a few more changes to wrap the footer up. The first thing we're going to do here is set the font size and reduce it a bit, just so it looks a bit better. So we'll go over here and reduce the text size from size 16 to 14. So we'll change this from extra small to small. Right, and we'll do the same thing for this. So change it to text small. Then we'll also go over here and do the same thing. Small. Nice. Another thing we need to do is go over to column, the column container, and then give it a max width of 980. Nice. And so this just makes sure everything doesn't go above the 980 width. Okay, and now the final thing we're going to work on is the responsive version of this footer. So right now, if you go over here to the mobile version, it does look nice. It looks like it's responsive, but if you load the page on your browser, you can see here that there's an issue. So we need to make this section responsive. All right, let's get started with that. So first of all, we're going to turn this row into a set of columns. So you click on the links column component, and now we go over here and select the mobile state. And now once it down mobile states, the direction should go from row to column. So I'm going to change this from left to right to top to bottom. And just like that, you can see it looks a bit more cleaner on mobile devices. Now the last thing we need to do is make sure the width of this section doesn't exceed what it should be. To do that, we're just going to look for the container. Okay, so now we have this style here, minimum width, and it's set to 24 rem. So we'll want to remove this style. So on mobile devices, it doesn't exceed the max width of the viewport. So let's clear this value over here. All right. Now the last thing we're going to do is also make this section a column. So we're going to click on other links. We're going to click on the mobile state, and we're going to set this to be a column on mobile devices. And we can add some spacing over here. So let's give this a gap of, let's say, spacing 3. Nice. And if we go back over here and refresh the browser, we can see now there's no overflow and our footer is now responsive. Okay, and that's it. We just finished building Apple's homepage in Clutch. From setting up the project to building out every section step by step. You can click this button over here to see the preview of your website. So over here, I already have the preview link loaded. So I can reload this and we can check everything out to make sure everything works fine. And yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully you've picked up some cool tricks along the way and you've gotten more comfortable working with Clutch's components and Clutch elements. If you haven't already, make sure to join the Clutch Discord. You can find it in the video description down below. I would advise you to join the Discord because it's a great place to share your projects, ask questions, and get feedback from the community. And if there's a specific website or layout you'd like to see broken down next, just feel free to suggest it there. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.